WNYC Studios is supported by Odoo. When you buy business software from lots of vendors, the costs add up and it gets complicated and confusing. Odoo solves this. It's a single company that sells a suite of enterprise apps that handles everything from accounting to inventory to sales. Odoo is all connected on a single platform in a simple and affordable way. You can save money without missing out on the features you need. Check out Odoo at odoo.com. That's odoo.com.
It's the Brian Lehrer Show on WNYC. Good morning again, everyone. Well, there are big changes coming next month to student loans for new borrowers, people with current student loans, undergraduate and graduate student borrowers included, and parents and caregivers borrowing money to help their dependent children. These changes were part of last year's H.R. 1, known to its supporters as the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. There were also lawsuits over some of the changes and claims that one consequence could be ending up with a healthcare provider shortage. To walk us through these changes to programs and even their acronyms, we're joined by NPR education correspondent Cory Turner, who put together a handy guide to this at npr.org. Cory, thanks for some time for the WNYC audience.
Brian.
Yeah, welcome. So you've broken your guide into categories, so let's go through some of them. What are the options for people who have taken loans and won't be taking more because they've graduated or finished their education? What's changing?
Yeah, I mean, the good news, bad news for current borrowers is that they're going to get to keep most of the current repayment options. So they actually have a lot of choices, a lot of plans to choose from, including several plans where your monthly payment is based on your income, which means the less you make, the lower your monthly payment. Current borrowers will also be able to choose, if they want, a new plan that was designed and created by Republicans as part of, as you mentioned, the One Big Beautiful Bill Act last year. It's called the Repayment Assistance Plan. So lots of options for current borrowers, Brian.
And listeners, we can take your questions. If you want to know what this is going to mean for you or anybody you know or care about, 212-433 WNYC, 212-433-9692. Call or text. One big category, I understand that some 7 million borrowers need to take action because they're enrolled in the repayment program offered under President Biden called SAVE. What's happening to SAVE?
Yeah, so your listeners probably remember SAVE was the big income-based repayment plan that President Biden tried to create, and it was really generous in a sort of unprecedented way. It offered low-income borrowers a $0 monthly payment, and monthly payments for everybody on SAVE were calculated based on a really small portion of their income. Ultimately, that plan got blown up at the courts, and then Republicans with the One Big Beautiful Bill last year officially, legislatively voted to shut SAVE down. So we know there are roughly 7 million borrowers who are still enrolled in SAVE. They're having to pay interest on their loans now, and they're going to need to change repayment plans. This is really important because they need to understand if they don't change plans on their own, if they don't make the choice, then after a certain amount of time, the education department is going to make that choice for them. And what we've heard is they will be automatically enrolled in what is essentially the least flexible or generous repayment plan. It's the standard repayment plan where the monthly payments are fixed and it does not really take your income into account. So if you want to be in a more flexible plan, if you're worried about whether or not you can make your monthly payments, it's best to make that choice yourself rather than wait for the department to make it for you. And as I said, for folks who are in the SAVE plan, who are not going to take out new loans, all of their loans are sort of current or older loans. They have lots of options to choose from when it comes to repayment plans. but
Can you
they
get
do need to be in touch with
specific?
their loan servicer.
Yeah, so don't do nothing because
Don't
then
do
the
nothing.
federal
Right.
government is going to put you in a plan without your input. Can you go over some of the main plans on offer and how they're different from each other for people transitioning from SAVE?
Sure. So I tend to think of repayment plans in two families, basically, Brian. Like there's the fixed payment family of plans that's pretty rigid, and it doesn't really matter your income. You're basically taking your debt and dividing up your monthly payments into the same monthly payment every month plus interest over a set number of years. So, like the standard plan is 10 years and it just spreads your payments out equally across 10 years. Now, obviously, if you're not sure where you're going to be working next year, or you go through periods of time where you don't have enough income you feel like to keep up with your payments, those plans are probably not right for you. Those plans are the standard plan, there's a graduated plan, there's an extended plan, but really all of them, if you're experiencing sort of inconsistency in your income, you want to go to the other family of plans, which are all essentially they're called income driven repayment plans. And there are a bunch of them. It's confusing. There's an older one called income based repayment. That's probably going to be one of the best options for a lot of folks right now. It's known by its acronym IBR. There's another one, income contingent repayment. I mean, honestly, these acronyms are names. Like, they get a little mind-boggling. But it's also important to remember a couple of them are also like Save. They're being sunsetted by 2028. So if you go to the primer I put together at NPR's website, like I go through all of this stuff. Like you could enroll in the plan known as Pay as You Earn, which has it's pretty flexible, it's relatively accommodating for low income borrowers. But the problem is it's being sunsetted by July 1st, 2028. So you're going to have to go through this whole process all over again in 2 years. And then, as I said, there's also the brand new income-driven repayment plan that Republicans created called the Repayment Assistance Plan. I will mention, Brian, that one comes with a couple new perks that some borrowers might find helpful. It actually waives any interest that is left over each month. Let's say you make your monthly payment, right? And that payment doesn't handle all of the interest your loan accrues. It actually waives any interest that's left over. And what that means in practice is your loan doesn't grow. You're not sitting there making your monthly payments and yet watching your loan grow, which I can tell you as a reporter, I talked to a lot of borrowers over the last decade, and that was their predominant experience as student loan borrowers, making their monthly payments, watching their loans grow. And then the other thing the new repayment assistance plan does is it has an interesting principal match for really low income borrowers, just to make sure not only do their loans not grow, but that they can see them shrink ever so slightly each month.
A number of people are calling or texting about the public service loan forgiveness program, and we'll get into the details of those, but I think we've got quite a few listeners who are in that program, or people in their families are in that program, and we're going to take Nathan in Larchmont to represent the group. Hi, Nathan. You're on WNYC.
Hi, third time. Great. So I have been, I have kind of been on the program, but kind of not, because when COVID hit, I didn't have a job, and we had forbearance. And then I was on SAVE very briefly, and then, the courts halted that. So I've been stuck in this limbo, but I've had this government job for 5 years, but I've been too afraid to start paying, the $2,000 a month or whatever they're trying to require. Every now and then, the Trump administration would send me a letter. Oh, hey, you need to start paying a bunch of money. But until the courts demanded that I did, I was, scared what they would charge. So I assume the answer is no, but I was like, is there any way that I could pay a chunk that gets those 5 years of public service counted in some way?
Nathan, thank you. Cory, let's back up one step to make sure we're bringing
Sure.
everyone along, and then you can answer Nathan's specific question. The Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program is for people who work in various kinds of public service jobs. He said he's working in government, all kinds of nonprofits, where if you stay in that sector for 10 years, what happens to your loan under the old rules?
Yeah, and it's a two-tiered thing. So you got to work in public service for 10 years. You've also got to make, and this is the sticking point for lots of folks, you've also got to make 120 payments on your loan. And so assuming you've served 10 years and you've made those 120 payments, then whatever is left over of your loan will be canceled or forgiven. So that is the deal.
120 payments, because that's 12 months a year. That's 10 years of monthly payments. And then it's the remainder that would be canceled?
That's right. It's anything that is left over of your loan after those 10 years, the government agrees to forgive.
And so to Nathan's specific question, did you get it?
So to Nathan's specific question, there have actually been a lot of questions that not just borrowers have, but I have, frankly, around a program known as the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Buyback Program. It will allow some borrowers to essentially, in a lump sum, pay off whatever outstanding term they might have. You know, let's say they were at 110 payments, right? And they just want to fast track themselves to loan forgiveness. The buyback program technically would allow them to make up those payments they hadn't made yet or missed, as long as they had already put in their 10 years of service. So I guess my first recommendation to borrowers who may be in this situation is to go online, go to federal student aid, and look up the PSLF buyback program. I know that there's, or at least there was the last time I checked, there was a pretty big backlog of requests of the Education Department to process PSLF buyback claims. So I haven't checked in on it lately, but I would send folks to the website there to follow up on the rules and see if they qualify. I also want to, though, talk a little more broadly about this, because I know that the COVID forbearance and the SAVE plan, it threw a lot of folks for a loop. It was nice insofar as they didn't have to make payments, but it also meant a lot of borrowers who were working in public service also weren't earning any credit towards public service loan forgiveness. And so I want to make really clear to folks, like, that offer is still on the table. PSLF has been in the headlines a lot over the last year. There have been some efforts by the Trump administration to sort of nip and tuck around the edges, but the program is still available. But if you are, say, in the SAVE plan, you cannot start earning credit towards public service loan forgiveness without getting into a new plan, without changing plans. You can go to IBR, which I mentioned. You could go to the pay plan. If you wait 2 more weeks, on July 1st, the brand new repayment assistance plan will come online. That one also allows you to earn credit towards public service loan forgiveness. But if you have several years left, it seems to me, unless you can afford an enormous lump sum payment, it seems to me that the best path forward at this point is to get back into a repayment plan where you can start making progress again towards that 10-year, 120 payment requirement.
If you're just joining us, folks, we're talking about changes that are coming on July 1st to student loan policies from the federal government for old loans and for new loans with NPR education correspondent Cory Turner, who put together a guide to this at npr.org. So whatever questions we don't answer here, definitely go to npr.org and find that if you have remaining questions. So let's move from loans that people already had to new loans from anyone borrowing from July 1st on. What's the biggest thing that changes?
Well, so there are a couple things, Brian. Let's start with the repayment plans. So if you are borrowing after July 1st, you will lose access, for the most part, to all of these older plans that we've been talking about. And you will have access moving forward to only the two new repayment plans that were created as part of the One Big Beautiful Bill. One of them is what I've already described, the repayment assistance plan. The other one is called the tiered standard plan, which is basically a fancier version of the standard plan I described earlier, where it's just spreading out your payments evenly month to month over a 10-year period, or this new plan, depending on the size of your debts, it will stretch that window out. So the larger your debts, maybe you get a 15-year window or a 20-year window. The other thing we need to talk about, Brian, which is, to me, one of the biggest changes that borrowers are going to have to make sense of, are new borrowing limits, specifically for graduate students. Okay, so folks borrowing for undergraduate, nothing has changed. The limits did not change. You're good to go. Those limits actually haven't changed in many years. But for graduate students, the limits for most borrowers are going to change pretty dramatically July 1st. For most graduate school borrowers, the new limit is going to be $20,500 a year, with an aggregate, I believe, of $100,000. And that's a pretty big change, considering up until now, graduate school borrowers have essentially been allowed, through a program called Grad Plus, they've been allowed to borrow as much as they need to cover the cost of their program. So if you're going to a program that costs you $50,000 a year, including, let's say, living expenses, you could borrow $50,000 a year. But under these new limits, you will be capped at $20,500, period, end of story.
I understand there is an exception to that for grad school programs that qualify as professional, and that includes a fair number, like chiropractic, clinical psychology, dentistry, law, medicine, optometry, osteopathic medicine, pharmacy, podiatry, theology, and veterinary medicine. These categories existed previously, but why make the exception for those? Do they just want, is this like a culture war thing where the Trump administration and the Republicans in Congress don't want people getting, sociology degrees and American history PhDs and things like that?
So I don't know what the motivation was. I can't explain that. But I will say it's more complicated than a simple question of culture war back and forth. So these definitions, these 11 categories of professional fields, these have been around in student loan law for quite a while. These are not new to this bill last year. They only matter now because for the last 20 years, they didn't make any difference to how much money a graduate student could borrow. A professional degree student going to law school or medical school or podiatry school could borrow no more, no less than someone getting their master's in social work. And so the fact that these categories existed didn't really matter. What's changed is, with the law last year, Republicans voted for everyone outside of these professional degree fields to have their access to loans capped. So only these professional degree fields can then borrow up to $50,000 with an aggregate of $200,000.
Huh.
Why? I mean, my understanding is the language in the law itself is actually more flexible, and where things got quite tight, and I think controversial, happened in this pretty wonky process called rulemaking, which is when the Ed Department convenes a group of experts who sort of interpret the law and figure out how are we going to implement this. And it was in that rulemaking process where they decided to make access to those professional loan limits exclusive to those 11 categories. And I think traditionally there were only 10 categories. They added one. I believe the one they added is clinical psychology. But it was in the rulemaking that they decided to create this sort of two-tier system.
But am I seeing correctly that nursing is not included in the exception? Does not qualify as professional, and with a higher borrowing limit? Neither is physical therapy.
Nope.
So
that's right. There are quite a few.
Why?
I mean, look, there are quite a few master's programs, graduate programs, certification programs that will fall outside of these loan limits at some schools. And this will make life difficult for students. I'll be straight up with you, Brian. I'm not going to defend the loan limits. I think they will make life more difficult for students. I will say this: if you look bird's eye view at the overall cost of graduate school and graduate school programs, the vast majority of programs, last I looked, it was like 3/4 or more, fell within these new loan limits. So it's not that these limits for, say, folks interested in pursuing nursing, it's not that it will put nursing entirely out of reach. What it will do is put a lot of pressure on those programs that charge a lot more. And it might get borrowers to think twice about, going to their, local or regional public university where the price might be within the loan limits versus, some other private institution that's charging twice as much.
So to
it
that
is
point,
putting a new burden on borrowers to be their own advocates, to compare prices, and to ask hard questions of the programs that charge more. Why are you charging more? Why is it that I can get this same degree over here for half as much?
Right. So are these changes aimed more at protecting students and simplifying the process, or at protecting repayment for the lenders? I mean, this might drive borrowers into the private market. Look at NYU and Columbia's MSW programs, for example, at $80,000 is the number I've seen. Might deserve scrutiny, but is that part of the motivation here, to drive scrutiny and then maybe tuition reduction at some, private university graduate programs?
There are a bunch of answers nested within that question, Brian. I think it's less about protecting lenders, plural, because let's be honest, these are federal student loans. The lenders are taxpayers. And so the only benefit here to private banks is if these loan limits drive some borrowers into private student loans, which is perfectly possible. But I think it's also important to keep in mind that some lower income borrowers might not be able to qualify for a private student loan.
To that point, let me get one more caller on here before we run out of time. And this goes to the culture war question that I asked before. And Sarah in Manhattan is calling in and identifying herself as the Dean of the School of the Arts at Columbia. Sarah, thank you very much for calling in. Hello, Dean.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me.
Go ahead.
So, I wanted to speak on the culture war question. First of all, I'm so grateful that you're having this conversation. I was on my phone on July 5th 2025 about all of these student loan issues for graduate students, which have really just not been covered. So thank you to your guests and to you for bringing this. There was a New York Times story about it last week, so I'm really hoping that the public will start paying attention. But I did want to answer to your culture wars question, and as I've seen, not only this current question, the question you're talking about right now about the elimination of the Grad Plus, the very narrow definition of what counts as a professional education. And there's a third thing, which I don't know if you've talked about yet. I came in a little late to the discussion about schools, departments or programs where a student would have earned more if they hadn't gone, like if they were just carrying on in their career and hadn't gone to graduate school for this program, that if their salaries aren't proven to be higher, then that whole program could be ineligible for loans and for the students to get federal loans. And in my opinion, if you put all of it together, what you're seeing is a concerted effort to simply make lower income and less privileged people able to go to graduate school, and a value system that says the only graduate education that's valuable is the graduate education that makes you more money than you would have. So if you were working as, on Wall Street and decided you want to be a kindergarten teacher, you would not be eligible for loans or whatever combination of things you want to think about. So, to me, who's, involved in arts education, I just profoundly disagree. And I don't think the society, I don't think our public has weighed in on whether they agree with these two big features, that lower income and people who have difficulty getting loans shouldn't be able to go to graduate school, or B, that only careers that generate higher salaries are valuable in our society.
As Dean of the School of the Arts, do you think it's part of a war on the arts? Because we know what kinds of attitudes people in the arts come with.
That's true, though I don't think the arts are being singled out here. I think, there is some mix. There were some good motives behind earlier versions of these things to try to prevent people from getting entrapped into debt. None of us wants that. And we do everything we can to try to support our students. But I think there is, the idea that graduate education is somehow a kind of pointless, subversive thing, pointless and or subversive is certainly in the water. But I don't think that, I'm not sure how much thought went into all of this and who's behind it. It's been very opaque and, as I say, not a big part of the public discourse at all. So it's a little hard to tell. But I do think the artists have something to say about why this kind of education matters and what it offers to the world.
Thank you for calling. We really appreciate it. And one last question as we run out of time, because I think a lot of callers will have this question, Cory. It says in a text, is there someone to call and talk to for one's own situation?
Well, so I would call your student loan servicer. Whatever the company is on the email that they send you that tells you what you need to do and when, it is their job. Some do it better than others, but it is their job to be able to answer your student loan questions. And Brian, I just want to throw in one thing quickly here that goes to something you asked me previously. I do think we're at an important moment here with the cost of graduate school. The idea that a school would charge $60,000, $70,000, $80,000 a year for a master's in social work, I think it's really important to ask: is a social worker with that degree going to be able to pay off, 2 years worth of debt like that? Like, I think we have reached a moment where lots of schools are using their graduate programs to help subsidize undergraduate programs. They are raising prices at the graduate school level that, depending on the degree, are just it's not fair to the borrower to ask this kind of price, especially for artists. The problem here is that we live in an economy that doesn't seem to value artists as much as it values, say, MBAs. At the same time, if a school is going to charge an exorbitant amount of money for a degree that it knows borrowers are going to have a hard time paying off, it's possible that loan limits the Trump administration believes that loan limits will ultimately lower prices. I've talked to a lot of economists who aren't convinced, but
Right.
it's
We
possible.
will see. Well, hopefully we're not going to wind up with a healthcare worker shortage when people can't afford to go to nursing school anymore or physical therapy school anymore with those not included in the higher loan limits anymore. But we will leave it with that question with NPR education correspondent Cory Turner, who does himself have some more information for some of you that you may find useful, because he's put together a guide to the new student loan law at npr.org. Cory, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me, Brian.